Hello and welcome back to my bedroom. We are here today because it is so hot in the UK. We have reached the seventh circle of hell, not just in life, but also now in temperature. So I can't be in my studio where I normally write and record because I need the aircon unit, which is going to be that noise that you may hear in the background. I'll do my best to reduce it on the mic as well as with, obviously some spooky music in the background because that was missing from my last video and that really irritated me. So that's what we're going to be doing. So today we're talking about the Wendigo. Now I will be doing another video on the Skinwalker, which may be a little bit longer and may have a bit more, as in a few more stories about the Wendigo as well, because I want to go into a bit more depth and I don't want to make all of it in this environment because I literally just got myself a proper mic as well with kind of tripod thingy, desk tripod, that's it. And then what ended up happening was the temperatures became unbearable to live in. It's not one of those things where you can just have a fan blowing hot air around. An aircon unit is a must. So that's pretty much the gist of it. But for those of you that haven't been here before, hello, my name is Patrice and this is Hort Gothic. I talk about all things spooky, scary, creepy, unusual and strange. Folklore is my fave, hence why we are discussing the Wendigo today. And we are going to take off from there. So if you have never heard of the full stories that go around and just the Hollywood version, which is, to do with the antlers and the deer obsession, which crosses over to the Skinwalkers as well. Just obsession with deers and deer skulls. Don't understand it. But anyway, if you haven't heard more than just that, then join me today and let us explore. Been trying to understand about this folklore for quite a long time, and I didn't speak on it before, even though loads of people have been talking about Wendigos and Skinwalkers, and some people believe they're the same thing, even though they're not. And the lore around both creatures, cryptids, whatever you want to call them, is extremely interesting because they are vague. And I believe that they are vague for a reason. It's essentially the first people of the country that is America, and the indigenous people to that land, and also in terms of the Wendigo parts of Canada, didn't discuss these things for a reason. Because one, the Wendigo was more a warning of what could happen. And with the Skinwalker, it was less of a discussion around a campfire, fairy tales. I don't know why I said fairy tales, but I guess fairy tales are quite creepy as well. Anyway, but campfire ghost stories, it's not that kind of thing in the culture that we and the cultures we will be speaking about today. But whereas the Skinwalker is associated with the Navajo people, with the Wendigo, we are going to be talking about the people who are the Algonquin speaking tribes. And please forgive me if I mispronounce certain words. I will be trying my very best. So as I was saying, I am by no means like an expert in the indigenous people of Canada or American, Native Americans and their law. I have just done some research and I am trying to discuss what the Wendigo was and was meant to be, rather than this kind of monster of horror movies that it's become. And like I said, with my other videos that I can put on for longer, which I will do once the weather stops being ridiculous, then I will do, and I'll be going into a lot more detail with Skinwalkers as well, and the truth about them, just focusing on that a little bit more. So the Wendigo, specifically associated, based on my research, with the Cree people, the Wabanaki, and please forgive me if I am butchering these, and also the Anishinaabe people, and they are also referred to as Ojibwe, but I think Ojibwe is the language they speak, Ojibwe, but they like to be referred to as Anishinaabe. Please forgive me. And I think that means first people. Like I said, I'm no expert, I'm no professor here. But I wanted to get those things right because Like with the Banshee, which is a video that is also available on my other account that you can post longer videos on that video as well, you will see that there is a lot of confusion with the Banshee. People think that the Banshee was existed from, lots of different cultures around the world, and that it can travel to different places and it can turn up in any country, when the real story of the Banshee originated from old ladies and old women, the elders of the community in Ireland, and some parts of, and some clans with a C, of Scotland, and Ireland, that would, these were very revered women as well, and they would ask them to keen, which means wailing, at people's funerals and their burial services, which would usually happen the day after the person passed. And these were revered elder women known as wise women, and then later on people would accuse of witchcraft, but only happened in one tiny town in Ireland, believe it or not. I wonder why. And that is where the Banshee legend then came from, as her being this harbinger of death. So like I said, these things have been twisted, and the vagueness of them, as a, kind of enabled people to twist them even more. So that is what kind of had me poking around in the whole Wendigo thing. So when the Wendigo is more than just the boogeyman story. It is in relation to what happens when you are not part of the community, when you are not part of the people that you are supposed to be part of, and you step away from that and betray them, when you go against your family and you do something horrendous, when you show gluttony, when you isolate yourself. And it also speaks of spiritual corruption. So instead of respecting spirit and respecting the culture's spiritual beliefs and coming together as a community and putting your family above all, and not putting yourself in isolation and giving in to gluttonous ways and greed, instead of doing that, you come together and you stay with your people and you respect it. But for those that don't, and in specific groups of people, it was believed that that's when one could become a Wendigo. And what's quite frightening with the Wendigo, as with the Skinwalker, is that these are both things that you could become, not just things that are necessarily going to go after you. Because with the Wendigo is not going to necessarily come after you. And that's something that has been put into people's minds from the whole monster Hollywood ghost story thing. That's not the thing. They won't go specifically looking for a specific type of person or type of people. It's more of a warning. And essentially, forget about the whole horned idea of Hollywood's weirdness. The real creatures, they're seen as extremely tall, right? So I've read of descriptions from 8 feet tall to 15 feet tall, and very, very emaciated, so thin, starving looking, okay? And this is significant. They are very gaunt, very pale, stretched. Their skin is like stretched over their bones, and their bones are like sticking out from everywhere. They'll have a lot of kind of blood around their mouth and on their fingertips, and like their nails are quite short, shorter than mine though. And there will also be blood there as well. The other thing is that they can get, if they can't get anything to eat, because their hunger can never be satiated. That's the whole point. The whole point is part of their punishment for their deed is that their hunger can never be satiated, and as a result, they could get so hungry that they can eat parts of themselves. So obviously it links in then to cannibalism. There's one story that I hadn't heard of, which I found really significant, which was the story, the case of Swift Runner, who was part of an Indigenous people of Canada. And what happened with him was something that people had to investigate. And this is now, we're talking about this really horrible winter that happened in 1878 to 1879. So as around that period of time. So this story of Swift Runner, there's a picture here, and that's shortly before his execution. Why was he executed, one might ask? Good question. So this is one of the most infamous real-life Wendigo cases that has been spoken about. I didn't know about it, but then again, that's why I was doing my research. And it actually happened. So He was a Cree trapper and hunter, and very well renowned and well respected within his community, and also known for his skills as well as being a trapper and a hunter. And he was a member of the North, it's the London coming out, Northwest Mounted Police. So we're talking about a dude that was, well respected amongst his people, amongst his community, and he was also a copper, So people were like, yeah, Northwest Mounted Police, great guy. Um, he lived in what is now Alberta, Canada, north of Edmonton, and he was known, like as I said, as a respected figure until that fated winter, 78, 79. So what we would be like, December into January, I'm supposing. That year, Swift Runner took his wife and 6 children, his mother and his brother, into the remote forest to hunt and trap for the season. This was very customary for the Cree families during the harsh Canadian winters, so there was nothing suspicious about this. This was something that the Cree people did, and he was taking his people there to hopefully, obviously, have some food and live out the harsh winters that they had to face. In the spring, though, the only person that returned was Swift Runner. No one else came back. Nobody. He told the authorities and his people that, unfortunately, his family had passed away from starvation, that he could not catch anything. There was nothing there, and the winter was too harsh, the weather was too severe, too much ice, blizzards, and so on, and he was the only one that survived. But both his people, community, and the police were like, but you don't look like you're starving. You don't look like emaciated. You don't look like you've had a harsh winter. In fact, you look healthy. You look like you had a good winter. Which obviously raised eyebrows. Both. And people decided to go looking and check out what was going on. Because people did fear the worst. As you can imagine, the worst was what happened. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about this today. So the investigators travelled to the winter camp that Swift Runner and his family were at, and human bones were scattered everywhere. There was evidence that his once family had been cannibalized. It's probably the best way for me to put that. And the fact that it was also went into very graphic detail of what happened with the bones specifically. And there was also still a pot cooking away with, it was an animal. Let's put it that way. I think that's the safest way I can put it. Swift Runner then confessed to the murders of his family and the cannibalism, including his youngest son, who had only arrived in that earlier spring, so wasn't even a year old before his very short life was ended. Actually, sorry. I got that wrong. Actually, this is worse than what I thought. His son arrived once spring had started. So spring had started, the weather had started to get better, things had begun to thaw out, and a lot of animals were available to hunt and trap. There was a lot of game, and yet he still consumed his newest son that was a newborn, just born that spring. Nobody could understand that. And that detail can't be ruled out. I can't not say that, even though it's difficult to say. I can't not say that. There's a reason for it. Because with the others, yeah, it's horrible, and it is horrible, but somebody might say, okay, he was starving. Does that justify his mother, his wife, and 6 children, and his brother? No, not at all. No, it really doesn't. But especially for somebody who was a renowned hunter and trapper. But the really significant thing is, after spring has arrived, you could come back. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? There's no reason into it. Instead, it feeds into the Wendigo law. The law of wanting to satiate a hunger that will not be satiated. And the law of wanting, specifically, to have human meals. 4 meals. Yeah. Swift Runner insisted that he had been possessed by the spirit of the Wendigo. He insisted that it had possessed him for that short time and then it had gone. However, apparently that's not the way it's believed to work amongst a lot of people that believe in this law. It's not something that you can be possessed by that then leaves, even though he did insist on it. And in Algonquin, the Algonquin speaking people and their folklore, it's something that is a cannibal spirit that's monstrous and that they do believe in. But there's different stories as to how this can affect somebody. So he, unfortunately, that didn't kind of go over with people, and he was tried and convicted at Fort Saskatchewan in 1879. He confessed openly, not denying any of his charges, and reports say that he showed extreme remorse, but that he joked with the priest before his execution. Okay, that doesn't sound like remorse to me. The first legal execution in Alberta, he was hanged that same year. So, wow. I don't know what to say about that whole joking thing. That doesn't sound very remorseful. So, when we speak about the Wendigo, often there's this idea of Wendigo Psychosis because the thing is seen as, you know, how a lot of cultures talk about demonic possession and possession from evil spirits. This is how it can be spoken about as well. So the study of the Wendigo Psychosis is controversial culture bound syndrome, and it's described in very, very, very early psychiatric literature. In the next bit coming up, I will talk about the story that I was first told about the Wendigo and that I believed it to be, and nothing to do with a this picture here. I'm not describing things very well today, but that the psychosis looks like depression. The person starts to withdraw and isolate themselves. They become a lot more paranoid. They can't sleep. The insomnia becomes really chronic. Cannibalistic urges start to emerge even when other food is available. So it's not like, oh, I have to do this to survive. There are other things available. And a growing belief that one must consume specifically human flesh. You have to. It's like, it's compulsory. Obviously, as many of you may know, modern psychiatry no longer recognizes this as a formal disorder, but anthropologists and psychologists still debate whether Swift Runner was suffering from some mental illness interpreted through a cultural lens, or whether he was truly experiencing some kind of possession, or whether he was just using the Wendigo as an excuse for whatever happened to him that winter that made him lose it. So where I'm going to finish today with this video is, as I promised, with a story that I was told, like when I say told, read about. Not quite sure where, but it was quite some time ago, and it always stuck with me. And I think for me, it kind of best described the lore around the Wendigo that kind of made sense the most in my mind, you know? So, as I said, and we will discuss more in my next video, which I'll be putting up as soon as the weather is no longer like this and I can have a better setting and better environment. But let's get to the story. Let me stop talking nonsense. The story goes as follows, is that there was a young man and he was very, very eager. One might say a bit too eager, greedy, and wanted to take his father's place in and amongst his people and in the community. His father was very revered and was seen as chief, and he wanted his place. He wanted his position, the power, the benefits that came with it. His father and his grandfather kept trying to explain to him that his time would come and that he just needed to respect his elders. He needed to respect the laws and the way that they are in the community and their spiritual and cultural beliefs, and not make this about him and what he wanted. Unfortunately, the son did not take heed of this and went off in a huff, kind of like, you know, the prodigal son in a way, but this is a lot worse. And he went off in his little tantrum and isolated himself for quite some time. No one really knows what he did in that isolation, but when he came back, he wasn't quite the same. There was a look in his eye that people described as terrifying. They didn't want to be around him. His energy was off. And when he arrived back at the home of his father and his grandfather, they both sensed it too. They didn't feel like that was their son and grandson. Yet they let him stay, not asking him about what had happened. And he wasn't ready to give up the information either. That night, the grandfather awoke to some terrible noises that he could not ignore or mistake for any kind of animal. He went downstairs and he saw a horrifying scene. Essentially, the son had taken out and taken apart his father. He had also cannibalized him, which is one of the worst things that you can do in general, but especially to a family member. As we discussed with Swift Runner, this was a situation that was done not under possession or suspicion of, or because of the winter, or maybe, I feel like the Swift Runner may have had a situation a bit like Jack Torrance in The Shining, because of the environment and the isolation driven mad, possibly. This wasn't that. He went off in isolation to try and think of what he could do to overpower his father. And for some insane reason, that is what he came up with. And in doing so, his grandfather said to him, "You know what you've become?" And he says, "Yes, I have become as powerful as my father was. I have consumed him. He now lives within me." At which point his grandfather shook his head and said, "No, what you have done is committed a crime amongst our people, as well as absolute sacrilege amongst our spiritual beliefs and our culture, against our community and what we stand for. Isolating yourself was the wrong thing to do, and this is even worse." He told the boy then to gather up his father's bones and put them in a sack on his back. And he said to him, "Your gluttony, your greed, your isolation, your lust for power, and going against our spiritual and cultural beliefs has made you what you are. You are now a Wendigo. You are doomed to walk this earth, immortal, forever, never being able to put down the bones of the family member that you killed, the family member that you destroyed and consumed, as a constant reminder of what you are. And you will never be able to eat, not a thing, because the only thing you will want to eat was the thing you consumed that you are carrying on your back, and you won't be able to. So instead you will walk this earth, forever emaciated, starving, unsatiable, and unable to satisfy any kind of hunger that you may have. You shall scare people. No one will want you anywhere near them. And you wanted isolation and power? Your power is a curse now, and your isolation will be that so too." He then banished his grandson, and his grandson ran out, realizing the horrors of what he had done, but too late. And he was forever cursed, and his skin grew grey and taut and thin, and he grew taller, his bones longer, but he couldn't eat, not a thing. And that's the end of the story that I was told. So I don't know what you think about that one, but that one kind of really freaked me out. especially as I thought it was a very appropriate punishment that he was to carry the bones of his father as a reminder of the monstrous thing he had done and the monster he had become. Also, as the fact that he couldn't eat anything. So, in some of them, they say that they can eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, but they will never be satiated. In this one, it was you can't eat anything anyway. Food will turn to ash in your mouth. Any kind of meat, doesn't matter what it is, it will turn to ash in their mouths, and they won't be able to taste the thing or even swallow it because it will be ash and dust before it even gets to their throat. So that I feel is like a much more appropriate punishment. But again, it's a fear of what somebody could become if isolated from the community, if you turn your back on your spiritual and cultural beliefs, if you abandon your people, and if you instead pursue gluttony and greed and power instead of respect and honouring those traditions that came before you and the people that came before you. And that is the story that I kind of really resonated with and made a lot of sense to me as a warning. And it makes a lot of sense in general when people do things for lust, for power, for gluttony, for greed, when people isolate themselves away from others too much and the damage it can do and the monster you can then become. So metaphorically it works, and that's where I think the story really originated from, even though I know some may differ, and that is what we will discuss more of in the next video, where we talk about skinwalkers as well, and kind of what I've researched and believe to be more accurate, as well as the more Hollywood ghost story version. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Again, sorry for the annoying noise in the background and, the change of environment. It's just so hot. So ridiculously warm. I'll stop harping on about that now and let you get on with your day. Thank you for joining me as always. It is a pleasure, and I hope to see you in the next video. Much love, take care, be safe, stay spooky.